So you just bought your first Jeep and you're looking to figure out which mods to install in what order. Or perhaps you've had your Jeep a little while and you're not sure which direction to take it. I get a ton of questions in the comments, Instagram DMs, and messages over on Facebook about which mods to put on your rig next. So I've decided to put together a video that I'm gonna call the Jeep Mods Roadmap. Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Casey and I've been building Jeeps for the better part of the last decade. I have installed, broken, or tried pretty much every single Jeep mod, and I have 3 Jeeps currently that I use to make content here on the channel. So I figure I'm probably a pretty good person to make this roadmap for you guys. Today I'm going to take you on a journey of what I think are the 10 levels of Jeep mods, starting from a very basic, unmodified, brand new Jeep to something insane like the Demonator behind us. In this video, we're gonna focus on Jeep mods. From level 1, a brand new Jeep, to level 10, I'm not even sure what to call it. It's just level 10. So I've been fortunate enough to purchase 3 bone stock Jeeps and be able to build them up right from scratch. So let's start at level 1. This is 3 things that I pretty much wanna have on my Jeep before I take it out for the first time at all. The first one of those is gonna be a winch. A winch can get you out of so many different situations, especially if you start to include a little bit of recovery gear with it, with things like a snatch block. This is what I recommend to everybody. When they ask what their first Jeep mod should be, I pretty much always say a winch. There's so many scenarios that a winch can be of use to you. Even if you don't think you're gonna go out and get stuck, it's very easy to misjudge maybe a rock in the trail and get high centered. You could end up in some mud that's a little bit more deeper than you were expecting, and now your tires are just spinning. Or here in Canada, we run into unexpected snow patches all the time, and a winch will get you out of those situations. But that's only one of the 3 things that I recommend at level 1. So what is the second thing? That is gonna be some form of vehicle-to-vehicle communications, such as this very high-tech device that hasn't been around very long called a radio. A radio lets you communicate with the other people in your group. Never go off-roading alone. But it can also turn a day of sitting in isolation by yourself in your Jeep into a really fun one where you can have a lot of useless banter and trash talking with the rest of your friends in the group. Your radio setup doesn't have to be something super expensive and fancy that you hardwire into your Jeep. Save that for the future Jeep mod levels. You can pick up something that's handheld, easy to use, and fairly inexpensive, and bring that with you. But do keep in mind, you're gonna have to deal with battery life and range from the antenna. I can't really tell you what type of radio system to get. That is gonna vary a lot by the area that you're in and the groups that you're going out with. But some popular terms that you may hear are VHF radio, ham radio, GMRS radio, and if you're hanging out with some OG off-roaders, CB radios. And so the third thing that I'm gonna recommend at level 1 is some sort of GPS and mapping application. This is important for a couple of reasons. 1, you can figure out where you're going before you get started. 2, you can record where you went so you can maybe go back there another time. And 3, if you happen to get lost while you're out on the trail, it's pretty easy to find your way back if you've been recording a track on your GPS Maps application. I am currently using Onyx Off-Road on an iPad mini. I'm actually going to do a little video about this setup, so make sure you hit subscribe, and when that is up, I will put a link up in the corner, hopefully. But you don't have to go out and purchase an iPad to be able to start tracking your tracks and finding your way home when you're out off-roading. You probably don't even need to make a purchase at all. You have a perfectly good GPS map application running device in your pocket right now called your phone. And I have used my phone for several years, and it has been perfectly adequate for tracking all of my adventures. But if you do end up checking out Onyx Off-Road and you do like it and want to subscribe to their service, you can save 20% by using the coupon code KC250. So you've taken your Jeep out for a few times, you've started to feel a little bit of the addiction of off-roading, and you're starting to think about what is going to be the next thing to put on your Jeep. Now we have reached level 2. It's now time to start making some changes to your Jeep, both from a capability perspective, but as well aesthetically, and to start making your Jeep look a little bit more like you actually go off-roading and not just hit Starbucks drive-thrus. Level 2 is going to take us to tires. Tires are one of the most important upgrades that you can make to your Jeep. Not only will a new set of larger, more aggressive tires drastically change the look of your Jeep, but they're going to help you significantly with off-road capability, because you're going to be able to get something with a more aggressive tread pattern. Maybe it's a mud train tire, maybe it's a hybrid all-terrain mud train tire, or maybe you're going to go all out and look at some non-road legal, sticky, rock crawling off-road tires. But maybe save that for a future level. The big question is going to be what tire size to buy. Well, these are 40-inch tires, and this is definitely not for level 2. Generally, for tire size, what I'm going to recommend is taking a look at some 37-inch tires by 12.5 inch. So if you're wondering what that means the tires are going to be 37 inches tall and 12.5 inches wide where the tread is. And the general rim size for larger tires is going to be 17 inch. That's one of the most common sizes that you'll see in the off-road and Jeep space. So 37 inch, I think, is a really good size for the more modern Jeeps. Like this is a newer JL, this is from 2020. The Gladiator is a 2022, but Big Red beside us is a JK. It's an earlier version. If you have a newer Jeep, the upgraded drivetrain components are going to be a lot more forgiving when it comes to running a larger, heavier tire. If you have an older JK or even before, you may want to consider a 35-inch tire unless you're thinking you're going to head in to the future levels in this Jeep Mods roadmap and upgrade some drivetrain components. However, I drove my JK for quite some time with 37-inch tires and it handled them fine, but you have to be a little bit more careful because the drivetrain isn't as robust as the newer Jeeps. But even if you have a newer Jeep and things like fuel economy are on your mind when considering your Jeep mods, you may want to still consider something like a 35-inch tire because they will be lighter, they will have less rotating mass, and because they're smaller, it won't mess with your Jeep's fuel economy quite so much. When you start upgrading the size of your tires, it is going to throw things off like your speedometer. If that's not a concern for you, well, let's just skip on to level 3. But I think something that also needs to be included in level 2 is one of the most important Jeep mods, and this is called a Taser JL. It does work on the JTs as well. If you have an older model JK or a TJ, this probably isn't going to help you, but if you do have a 2018 and up, I highly recommend taking a look at this little module right here. It just plugs into a couple cables under your dash, and it's going to let you adjust for your larger tire size, but as well, it's going to add a ton of little features that you can unlock within your Jeep that you probably didn't even know about. If you want to find out more about them, I'm going to put a link to one of my other videos up in the corner. It's a huge list. I'm not going to go into it in this video, but this is one of the most useful things that you can add to your Jeep, even if you don't upgrade your tire size. I guess before I get too far in this video, something to note, every product or little thing that I talk about in this video will be available in the description. There'll be a link in there. I'm going to add those as affiliate links. So if you click on them, they're going to help support me making content and making videos here. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but I do get a little bit of commission, and that goes a long way with supporting the channel, me making videos, going on trips, and finding new products to test out for you guys and tell you what's good and what isn't. Everything in this video is going to be down in the description. There'll be a huge list of all the things that I'm talking about if you want to pick them up for yourself and help support me with no extra cost. One major decision you'll have to make at level 2 is, are you stopping at level 2 with just larger tires, or you think you're going to move on to level 3 fairly quickly? One of the challenges with adding larger tires is going to be clearance on your Jeep and whether or not these newer, larger tires start hitting anything. With the newer Jeeps, the JLs and the JTs, you can put on a set of 35s without changing anything. You can also put on a set of 37s if you just adjust your rear bump stops. If you're not familiar with what a bump stop is, it limits the amount of up travel that your tire can do on your vehicle. So if you add 37s, you do need to add a little bit of a bump stop to the back to prevent the larger tire from pushing up and hitting your inner fender liners, unless you're going to move on to level 3. Now, real quick, one last thing about level 2. For most of this video, I'm assuming you bought a Rubicon. This is the model of Jeep that I recommend to anyone that when you're purchasing a Jeep, you may feel like you're going to end up progressing through some of the future levels in this video. This is going to give you lockers, which is one of the best mods that you can add to your Jeep. If you don't have a Rubicon, I highly recommend looking at adding some lockers before you move on to the next level of Jeep mods in this video. Level 3. This is where we're going to start seeing some serious changes going on with the looks and capability of your Jeep. So you've upgraded to some larger tires, you feel like you need some more clearance, you're not getting to where you want to go on your adventures. Let's talk about suspension. So now at level 3, you've opened up a real Pandora's box when it comes to Jeep mods. When you start trying to plan out your suspension mods for your Jeep, it is an absolute sea of parts, options, and things that you may get out of improving your suspension. So I'm just going to keep this very simple for this video because we could probably make 10 full videos talking about different suspension mods and the pros and cons of each one. But what I'm going to kind of suggest is you start heading in one of two directions. This is going to be where you start to define what your Jeep's capabilities are going to be. Are you building more of an overland rig where you just need a little bit more clearance for those larger 37-inch tires, a little bit more clearance underneath your Jeep and your departure and approach angles, and you want a little bit more of a comfortable ride when you're out bombing through some dirt roads or forestry service roads like we have up in here in BC? Or are you going to start pushing your Jeep in the direction of being a rock crawler where you want a lot of articulation, a lot of flex, and the capability to go over just about anything? Part of either of those options is going to be adding some lift. And this is going to be achieved through adding some new springs that lift your Jeep up in the air a little bit higher. Gives you more clearance for your tires and gives your Jeep a little bit more ground clearance. However, when you start lifting your Jeep, it starts to mess with a whole chain of other things that affect your driving performance and capabilities. You can either look at doing something simpler like a drop bracket, which is going to lower your control arm down and return some of that more factory feel to driving your Jeep, or this is going to be the time where you start planning out a more in-depth suspension setup and start changing out things like control arms. So each of my Jeeps have very different suspension setups. On the older JK, we have a system here from Rockcrawler. On the JL, we have a system from Terraflex, and on the Gladiator, we have a system from Metal Cloak. They're all very different and they all perform very differently. It's going to be tough for me to explain all of the differences and nuances of these suspension systems, but at level 3, you've probably become more of an enthusiast and enjoy researching Jeep parts. Get used to that because all the future levels, you're going to be spending way more hours than you ever thought looking up and comparing and talking to people about Jeep mods. Now, one last thing before you move on from level 3 that you're going to want to think about is a spare tire carrier upgrade. Now, there are a lot of different options, whether you go with a full bumper with some sort of swing out tire carrier system, or you go with a little bit more of a simpler system that reinforces your tailgate to carry your spare tire. I recommend before you move on from this level to look at something because you're probably going to be spending more time on the trails, more bumpy trails, more difficult trails, and those are going to start to damage your tailgate if you have a larger 37-inch spare on there for too long. And I don't want to hear of any of you guys running just a rim on the back with no spare tire. Yes, that does happen. All right, level 4. This is where you're going to have to start accepting some of the problems and challenges and trade-offs with all of the Jeep mods that you've been doing. You've now upgraded your Jeep. It has a lift, a higher suspension. It's got bigger, wider tires. They might be sticking out a little bit. Your Jeep is going to start to look very attractive to some of the local law enforcement because of the mods that you've started doing. Now, depending on where you live, level 4 may or may not be a concern to you. But where we live, things like tire poke, and if you don't know what that is, that's when your tire sticks out past the fender, or just exposed tire behind you, start to become more of a problem as you move further and further into this off-road Jeep lifestyle. So this is when you might want to take a minute to start thinking about how far are you going to take your Jeep? Do you need to address some of these new problems that you've created, making your Jeep a little bit less street legal, or do you really not care? So things to think about are, do you need to have fender extensions, or are you just going to be chopping your fender right off and turning it into a rock crawler? Do you need to add something like mud flaps to prevent your new giant mud terrain tires from chucking rocks at the vehicles getting a little bit too close to you on the highway? Or do you just not care because you're an off-roader now and this is your lifestyle and everybody else just needs to accept it? But this is something I highly recommend you think about before you progress too far down the Jeep mods lifestyle and end up with a Jeep that you're pretty much afraid to drive anywhere because you might get pulled over and it get impounded. Level 5. This is where you're gonna start making some serious transformations to both your Jeep's looks and capabilities. One very simple mod that you can make on a newer Jeep, if you ordered it with a steel bumper, is to remove the end caps. If you didn't know, the steel bumpers have end caps that you can unbolt with, I think, 5 or 6 bolts. And now you can expose your entire front tire to anything in its way. And if you have an older Jeep and you didn't add a new bumper to it as part of adding a winch, this is the time to definitely be thinking about changing your bumpers. So with bumpers, you're gonna see generally 3 styles. You're gonna see full width, mid width, and stubby. So this is what I would call a stubby bumper. It tucks in very tight to the grill. It exposes a lot of the tire, and this is gonna give you the most capability because it is gonna expose more tire to obstacles, and it is going to increase your approach angle because now the bumper is gonna have a different shape to it. A mid-width bumper is gonna be a little bit wider. It's gonna come out partially past the grill, reduce a little bit of that capability, but also your Jeep isn't gonna be quite so much of a heat score around town. And then a full width bumper is going to be very similar to a stock size bumper. Why you would wanna upgrade to this? Well, maybe you wanna be able to add a winch, increase your approach angle, but not have your Jeep so obvious that it's heavily modified that you're running into problems and getting pulled over all the time. But the nice thing about the factory bumper, and when you take off the end caps and turn it into a stubby bumper, is it really does retain a lot of that factory Jeep look without making your Jeep look way over the top. We're gonna save that for future levels. But you can easily add larger tires and increase some of your off-road performance without having to go and spend a ton of money on a whole new bumper setup. Level 6. This is where you've had your Jeep for a little while, you've been out on some amazing adventures, but you do find that some of those amazing adventures, you end up getting home a little later than you anticipated. You're getting stuck out in the bush, you have to do a recovery, and it's dark before you can make your way off of the trail. This is the time to start thinking about adding some simple upgrades to your lighting system. But I'm not talking about going out and buying 40 light bars to stick all over the Jeep everywhere that you can and really show that you know that lighting is way more important than any other Jeep mod. No, I'm talking about adding a couple simple lights to your Jeep. There are a lot of lighting brands out there and they range massively in cost. There are some very good value brands that I think have a really good price point for bang for your buck, or you can go with something that you are gonna purchase once and never ever worry about for pretty much the entire life of your Jeep and move them onto future Jeeps, which we'll get to later in the video. And so you're gonna be looking at companies like I have here on the Demonator, Baja Designs. So on my bumper, I have a couple of their LP9s. These have a hybrid lens design. So they have a focused beam that throws it out far in the distance so I can see what's coming up. And they have a wide dispersed beam so that I can see things around me on the sides of the trail and give me nice wide coverage with just 2 lights low down on the grill that I've bolted on to my factory steel bumper. You might also want to add a little bit of additional lighting up top. Up on the pillar, I have some Baja Designs LP4s. These are a wide beam and I can turn these if I need and aim them and have a little bit more light around the front tires and front area of my Jeep if I'm going slower or rock crawling or going through some obstacles. I really need to kind of see where my tire placement is and around my Jeep. And if you start putting lights on your Jeep and you've skipped any of the levels that we've gone over to this point, be prepared to be made fun of by the rest of the Jeep community. Level 7, this is where I think you're gonna have to start to define exactly what it is you wanna be doing with your Jeep. Are you building it to be more of an overland, multi-day camping setup, or are you building it to be a rock crawler, tackle the hardest obstacles that you can find, and not worry so much about bumping into the occasional thing and doing some damage to your Jeep? You're now deep down the Jeep mods rabbit hole. If you're building a rock crawler, you're gonna start thinking about things like fender chops or fender replacements like we have here on the JK. That is gonna give you ultimate up travel, clearance, and prevent ripping those factory plastic fenders off when you get a little bit too close to an obstacle because you're pushing the limits of what you want to be doing out on the rocks and through crazy terrain. All right, guys, this is editing Casey from a few days later after shooting this video. I missed a couple of bullet points on my list here. When we talk about removing fenders, I also wanted to cover off other things like armor, replacing your rock sliders, because the factory Rubicon ones will eventually just not hold up to the abuse you're going to be putting your rock crawler through. But also, this is the time to be thinking about beefing up definitely things like skid plates. And I'm talking into the mic because it's super windy and I need to get this video done. But on your overland rig, I'm going to recommend just sticking with some upgraded rock sliders. Even the factory Rubicon ones are pretty good, but you may find that they start to bump into the body a little bit if you do find you're hitting some rocks. But I would probably stay away from adding any skid plates or anything like that. It's just going to add to the weight, and it's pretty rare that you're going to need it. We just ran the Rubicon Trail back in September, and 2 of the Jeeps that were with me didn't have any skid plates at all, and they did just fine. If you find that maybe you're traveling a little bit further to longer range destinations, places that you might have to spend the night to be able to go and see and get back from, this might be the time you want to start thinking about how are you going to bring food and other essentials along with you. So, time to start thinking about adding a fridge to your overland build, maybe some sort of power system so that when you shut off your vehicle when you get to camp at night, you can still keep your fridge running and maybe power some scene lighting around your vehicle so that you can see what you're doing while you're preparing dinner and getting ready to wrap up your day. You also want to be thinking about what is your camping setup going to start looking like. I don't think you're ready to dive into roof racks and rooftop tents at this point, but certainly start thinking about where you may end up as you watch the rest of this video, because you also want to be thinking about what are you going to be sleeping in with your overland rig when you go out and spend your night out on the trail. At this level, I don't think that it's time to start looking at an investment into something like a rooftop tent. That is a pretty big price point, but this is definitely a point where I think you start to change how your build goes, because you're going to need to carry more gear in your overland setup, or you're building more of a rock crawler rig, and in which case off-road performance is going to trump everything else. And one of those things is you don't want your Jeep to weigh a ton, so you're going to want to avoid some of the mods that you would put in it for an overland build. Level 8. This is the level where your newfound hobby of off-roading with your Jeep starts to consume all of your disposable income and start to eat into some of your monthly budget for necessities. If you're building a rock crawler, you've probably tackled all of the obstacles that you can possibly tackle in your Jeep up to this point without breaking anything. And this is where I think you're going to start wanting to think about larger tires, like 40-inch tires. But as soon as you go down that road, you're going to need some more expensive supporting mods. You're going to be wanting to do things like replace the axles on your Jeep with something larger. You're going to hear terms like Dana 60, Dana 80, Kingpin, Hydro Assist steering. So this is going to start to push your Jeep's capabilities into buggy territory. It's also going to make your Jeep much less comfortable and enjoyable to drive on the highway to and from the trails. If you've been building an overland rig, you've probably now spent enough time on the trails and nights on the trails that you start to hate your life every time you think about pulling out your ground tent and setting it up in some wet, muddy, and uncomfortable spot. This is when I think it's time to start thinking about things like rooftop tents and more complex systems within your Jeep to organize and store your gear securely so that it's not bouncing around, flying everywhere throughout your trip, and it's easy to grab and use because you've just spent the last 14 hours on a trail recovering yourself from some obstacle, and you got to camp at 12 o'clock at night and you still need to cook dinner, and you don't want to spend any time finding anything that's been scattered all around your Jeep from all the crazy adventures you've had throughout the day. However, whether you're building a rock crawler or overland rig, as I mentioned, this level starts to get very expensive. Things like axles, larger tires, and all of those other mods not only cost a lot of money to buy, but also come with a pretty hefty price tag if you can't install them yourselves. And for the overlanders, rooftop tents are not cheap, but if you want to find a really good value tent, check out this video of the review I did a couple of months ago. But also adding things like racks, because you're going to need something to bolt that tent to, also come with a pretty good price tag. And when you start to get into some of the organizing solutions inside your rig, they aren't cheap either. Level 9. This is where you've pretty much run out of money to spend on your Jeeps. It's starting to strain your relationships and your friendships in your life, but you don't care. There are new places that you want to go and check out, and there are obstacles you want to conquer. At level 9, you're going to be thinking about things like a tow rig, because now you've turned your rock crawler into such a rock-eating beast that the only way to get it to the obstacles that you want to go and try and conquer is by towing it on a flat deck behind a tow rig. And for an overland rig, you've probably found destinations that are too far for you to conquer with the amount of fuel that you brought. So you're thinking about things like long range extension tanks and throwing on as many Rotopacks jerry cans as you can on it. At level 9, the only way to really continue supporting this hobby is you're going to need to start becoming an influencer and getting sponsorships, because you have no money left to continue to support your hobby any longer. And at level 9, you've probably run out of Jeep mod ideas, so you're going to start thinking about things like engine swaps to a V8. There's no better way to let everybody else know just how much of a Jeep enthusiast you are, like the roar of a V8 going down the trail. Level 10, you have done everything. You have built your overland or rock crawler exactly how you want it. It takes you everywhere you want to go. It is your absolute dream Jeep, and there's literally nothing left for you to do. Well, now you've had your rig long enough, Jeep has decided to release a new model. And of course, it has upgrades and new features that you want. So level 10 is actually level 1. You're going to be starting all over again, but now you're such a Jeep enthusiast, how could you possibly pass up owning the newest, latest model from Jeep with some cool new features that you've been looking for that you haven't already added? So that is the Jeep Mods roadmap for you guys. I hope you, that is the 10 levels in the Jeep Mods roadmap. I'm sure there's some things I've forgotten or some things that you guys disagree with. So rest assured guys, I will make a newer updated version of this at some point. Make sure you subscribe because I love making helpful videos that are fun to watch. I'm going to suggest a couple other videos that you might want to check out right here. My name is Casey. Leave a like, leave any questions down in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.